Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 1990 film Child's Play 2, and it's out of this 7-movie collection for Blu-rays that I just bought recently, and I'm working through the entire franchise. If you didn't know, that's the thing I'm doing. I don't work through franchises of horror films all that often, but when I do, it's an event, and good place to do it. So this film, I just want to say off the bat, is a lot less about the newness of Chucky and introducing a concept and a new villain and the danger so much of Andy and his family. This is kind of more of the focus of Chucky as a character and Chucky's personality and, obviously Charles Lee Ray's personality inside of the body of Chucky, and trying to just move the story forward that way, kind of establish who Chucky is a little bit more. So that's kind of what you have to do since it's a sequel, because in the first film, you already introduced everything, so you have to take it somewhere else. So in this one, it's kind of just a continuation of that, but it's showing that the relationship with Chucky and Chucky entering Andy's life has, drastically changed it for the worse, too. So it still kind of fits into my theory on the last film's review, where I was talking about Chucky kind of symbolizing the outside influence that can happen to children to kind of make them bad, or seem bad in this instance. So, anyway, Child's Play 2, directed by John Lafia, who was a writer on the first one. He also directed The Blue Iguana, Freddy's Nightmares, like 2 episodes of Freddy's Nightmares, Man's Best Friend, some episodes of Babylon 5, yeah. I put 6 there, I don't know why. Babylon 5. And then a made-for-TV movie called The Rats, which I know nothing about. Obviously written by Don Mancini, who also wrote scripts for Cellar Dweller, the original Child's Play 3, Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, Curse of Chucky, Cult of Chucky, some episodes of Cannibal, and some episodes of Channel Zero. All good stuff. Apparently, the original script had an opening courtroom scene of Karen and Norris defending Andy, and also showing someone at the same time, kind of like intercutting, someone from the Play Pals company taking Chucky's body and rebuilding it. Obviously, we get the rebuild in the beginning of this, but we don't get the whole court thing. Instead, to kind of save some time, what they end up doing is they just have some of the people who work at the Play Pals company talk about what happened with Andy's situation. He goes to an orphanage where he's kind of being watched because of, his mental situation, from what the adults think. And then they basically say how Karen has basically been committed to a mental institution because of her basically saying that what Andy was saying was true. People are like, well, that's just, there's something not right there. But as viewers, we know that's not the case. So Jenny Agutter, who played the character of Joanne, the mother in the family who adopts Andy, she actually does not like this film at all, because a lot of her scenes ended up on the cutting room floor, and that made her more of a minor character than she originally was, based off what they actually shot. So it's always interesting to know those types of things, and maybe one day you get a director's cut and you get more of her in it. I don't know, but for now, this is all we get. And I don't think she was like super minor in it, but I mean, if that's the case, if she had a bigger role, I can see why she wouldn't like it. Brad Dourif, the voice of Chucky, obviously, was barely ever even on set of the film, because his lines were recorded ahead of time, and the main reason they were recorded ahead of time was to match up to the movements of Chucky, the animatronic Chucky's mouth. So what they ended up doing for Alex Vincent to kind of react to it, and other people, was they would just play the recordings when they were doing their acting, and they would react based off that. So I think the entire franchise, actually, Brad Dourif barely ever was on set, because he would just record somewhere ahead of time, and they'd use that because they needed to match up the mouth movements and everything. And so a lot of the cast and crew probably never really spent much of any time with him. There was apparently a tie-in novelization for this film that was later released by Matthew J. Costello, and apparently that delved more into the pasts of both Andy and Chucky, which is interesting. Apparently there was something about like Chucky's, one of his father, like actually being a little person, and him being picked on as a child and, some stuff like that. I can't totally verify that. I didn't read it, but that's what I saw online that people were saying the film was, or the book was about. The beginning with Chucky's burnt face and the eyeball being pulled out is actually kind of gross because he was alive. Like, us as the audience members know that he was alive at some point and somewhat human. If you view it as just like, if he was just a doll, if that wasn't like the possessed Chucky doll, then you would be like, oh, it's a thing. It's an inanimate object. But in this instance, it plays as more disgusting because it seems human to us, because he was very human, and he was actually literally turning human in the first film. And obviously that ends up being at play in this film as well, where he is again kind of starting to turn human once he's resurrected by Play Pals Company. Which I don't really understand why they remade the body. Like, it doesn't make sense, because you see at the end of the film that they have an entire factory just making these new Chuckies. Why did they remake the bad Chucky? Like, why wouldn't they just get rid of that? So I think that's kind of a big plot hole in the film, but once you get past that, it's fine. The scene really does invoke the creation of Frankenstein's monster in the beginning. When he's basically being put back together, he's being like cobbled back together. They show him grabbing the arms and putting him back on, the legs, putting him back on, all that type of stuff. So it's very Frankenstein's monster. They do a good job of quickly letting you know what happened since the first film. Andy under kind of observation, and his mother as well, psychiatrically. Obviously, that was, like I was saying, instead of actually showing the courtroom stuff, which I think is a better idea. I think they went a better route with that one. Another electrocution death. Almost as lame as the one in the first film. Almost. The fact that the guy gets electrocuted so much that he gets, like, blasted up in the air and there's some blood on him makes it better than the electrocution in the first film, but death by electrocution in films like this, never that great, unless someone like ends up exploding, like Chucky does at the end of the film, even though that wasn't electrocution. But I'm just saying, you got to take it a little bit further, and that's one of the things I've been very surprised about with this film is, the first film originated in the 80s, so I would think, slasher in the 80s, they probably wanted to go really hard on the gore and practical effects, but that really doesn't happen. Well, I mean, obviously they went hard on the practical effects as far as the, a moving Chucky, but I'm talking about like kills wise. Andy is either buying into what his therapist ends up saying, or he's playing the game because he basically knows it'll help him get out of that place. I would err on the side of the second thing. I do think that he's shown himself to be a very smart kid in the first film. So it would stand to reason that he's basically like, I know that nobody believes me, and I just kind of have to play along with these adults, and then that's how I'm going to get out of here and be in a better situation. And eventually he gets adopted by are they named the Simpsons, I think? Phil and Joanne. So yeah. When the Play Pals truck passes by the car that Andy's in, it's basically him staring his traumatic past in the face. At this point, it's a little bit later. You get the idea he's kind of dealt with some of his demons from this, some of the trauma from this, and he's at a point where he's better. But it's that kind of trigger moment to kind of reintroduce things into his head as being fresh when he sees that truck that has the, drawn rendering of Chucky. So he's like, or, it's supposed to be, ends up being Tommy in the one that's at the house he goes to. The home of Joanne and Phil is so stuffy and doesn't appear to be a good place for a child to grow up. Even Phil doesn't want Andy touching things. It's one of those houses that looks like it's, kind of museum-ish as far as the family goes. They're just like, everything's just here to look at. Like, don't touch it. Kids are going to mess it up. And you end up seeing that, Phil's fears come to life when the little figurine gets broken and he assumes that Andy did it. And then he's just like, this is what I was afraid of. But you get the idea throughout the film that Joanne really wants Andy and really cares about Andy. And Phil is way more like going along with Joanne and doing it to please her. And he's kind of like, okay, like, I see where you're coming from. It's from a good place. But, like, at the same time, I don't want my life messed up. I don't want my things messed with. Like, he's way more concerned about himself. And that's why immediately he's kind of casting Andy in this negative light, and he's less likely to believe him. He's less likely to really work with him. That's kind of Joanne's role, is to be more nurturing. Phil's really not. Although Kyle, who's, becomes his sister there, Andy's sister there, says that Phil's actually not that bad, but we don't really see a whole lot of that from him. When Andy's walking around, they shoot it a bit distorted, so it looks like an imposing quasi-nightmare from Andy's perspective. That's when he first gets to the house. Just notice that. It's kind of one of those shots, I forget what it's called, but like they basically shoot it so like it's wider in the forefront of the shot and it's like narrower further in. So it gives this kind of like distorted, nightmarish perspective. And it's from lower, so it's more of like, it's not exactly Andy's POV, but it's from his height, basically. So it's like we're experiencing what he's experiencing, like being in this new kind of scary place, because it's scary to kind of go to a new family at this point. He doesn't really know what he's getting into. Also, he's probably felt relatively safe where he was before, and now that he's kind of like out in the real world, he probably feels a little more like Chucky could be somewhere. And it really doesn't help when the Tommy doll, falls out of the closet in the room he's been given by the Simpsons. So another triggering moment for Andy is when Tommy falls out of the closet and onto him. When that happened, I was like, really? This kid's past, and you didn't make sure that you didn't have one of these dolls in there? Like, they brush it off and they're like, oh, you'll be fine, whatever. But they have to know that it was a big deal. Like, that's a big deal for him, and I think they should have treated it more so. When that corporate guy is manhandling Chucky, that he's gonna end up dying. That's kind of one of the themes, is if you manhandle the Chucky doll, Chucky wants to come after you, because he takes it very personally, and as we know, as he's starting to turn more human, he really feels pain quite a lot, and that really helps for the end of the film when, as a viewer, you're kind of like, oh, Chucky's very much in pain with all of these things that he's going through here, and that makes you feel good, because obviously he's the villain in this situation, and you want him to get his comeuppance. The suffocation death is good, but only for one reason. Obviously it's not really like bloody or like too violent, but the thing that makes it disturbing and good is the maniacal laughing that happens with Chucky, and just seeing those just devilish facial expressions and hearing that Brad Dourif voice. It works. So in that instance, you don't really need a whole lot of blood. You don't need it to be too much of a brutal death scene. It's good on its own. It really is. It's kind of funny when Chucky beats Tommy the doll to death. It's also clever because then he has the ability to assume Tommy's identity. But you do know that the real Tommy will eventually end up being found. It's one of those things where you're like, that's gotta be the aha moment, much like the batteries not being in Chucky in the first film. There's gotta be that moment where someone discovers Tommy, and obviously that ends up being Kyle, when Kyle's outside on that swing, which, I don't understand why he chose to bury, I guess, I was gonna say I don't understand why he chose to bury Tommy right under that swing, but because people's feet drag, it probably ended up being the place with no grass that was easier to kind of dig into. So, that's kind of my thought. Pause real quick for horror hydration. Gotta keep my vocal cords lubricated. I love the little pause that Chucky makes before he ends up calling himself Tommy for the first time. It's enough to make Andy suspicious, and it's that kind of nod to the audience that there's a crack in Chucky's performance, that he's not so seamless, that he made a bit of a mistake, and then that's when Andy's like, I gotta check and see if there's batteries in here. So he's smart enough to keep the batteries inside of him, which I wonder how that feels to him, like having the batteries in there, since he's kind of turning a little bit human. I think that would feel kind of weird to him, at least uncomfortable, but yeah, it's that moment of like, Andy's like, oh, I don't know about this. Like, he hesitated, and these dolls should not be hesitating. Again, a very smart kid for his age. I like the shot that shows Chucky's legs disappearing under the school bus. When Andy's going away for his first day of school, and he's on the bus, and you're just like, okay, he's with people, he might be fine. And then they show the bus pulling away, and you see just the legs kind of kicking, and then he goes up under the bus, and I'm like, that's a nice scene. That was cool. It's a wink at the audience when Andy's teacher is reading the Pinocchio book, because it's about a fake boy who was a toy turning into a real human. Obviously, that's what's going on with Chucky. Chucky, a doll, starting to turn into a human. Same thing. It's pretty funny that Chucky put profanity on Andy's school paper. I like that. That speaks to what I was talking about in the beginning, about this film is very much about Chucky's personality, about establishing Chucky more as like an iconic villain, so you can make more films in the franchise, which obviously they did. But I just like that because it gives that little bit of funny note. One of the big things that people ended up really liking about Freddy Krueger, what made him so iconic, was that he had a humor to him. After the first film, he started to develop more of a humor. And people like that stuff. They like a little bit of humor kind of mixed in with their horror. And I think that's kind of what they were going for with Chucky, especially when they do the profanity on the school paper. The teacher being beaten with the ruler is a bit funny. I also like the fact that they decided to like shoot it from the outside and just show the ruler with blood kind of like going up and down. Again, you don't have to show a whole lot of gore necessarily in that instance, but it works. Like, the sound design becomes a big thing at that point as well. Andy's got some real balls to try and kill Chucky with an electric carver. When he gets up in the middle of the night, he gets that electric carver and he goes down to the basement. He's like, I'm going to go kill Chucky. Like, serious balls there. Like, props to Andy for not really being afraid of this. He literally is in a situation where he knows, like, nobody's going to help me. Nobody's going to believe me. I have to do this on my own. And he does it. Like, he doesn't run and hide. He's just like, I'm going to deal with this. Doesn't work at first, but, you know. Most audience members don't care when Phil dies. Also, super lame death. The fact that he just breaks his neck. Could have come up with something better. Something else could have happened to him, you know. He could have fallen on something sharp and get brained or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, just I don't know. I didn't get it. Good moment when Kyle gets jumped by Chucky after she finds Joanne dead at the sewing machine in her bedroom. It was really good because you see her sit on the bed and then you see the sheets behind her start to rise up and then he just leaps on her. And that's cool. That's a good way to start like a higher octane scene. I don't think Chucky would have the weight to go through a car window. Let's put that one out there. Another thing that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, kind of plot hole, is, you know, she's driving, she's buckled in, Kyle, that is, and then she's like, I'm gonna take care of him, and she just slams the brakes really hard, and he goes flying through the windshield. Now, windshields are actually very strong. Maybe he could crack it, but I guarantee he was actually not heavy enough to go flying through it like that. Kind of ridiculous. I like how Andy and Kyle make no effort to save the head of the orphanage. When she starts getting attacked, they literally are just like, let's get out of here. Like, it was pretty obvious they didn't really like her from the interaction they had, but they probably should have tried to help a little bit. I did find it funny, though. They're just like, we're out of here. Let's go. It's really something seeing all those good guy dolls in boxes in the warehouse. It is kind of this moment that just makes you like, how would they necessarily find the actual Chucky in here? Like, it'd be so easy for him to hide. And then on top of that, they have all the pallets of it stacked up so that it literally ends up being like a maze. And that comes into play because they have a hard time getting out of there at the end. So it really is this kind of like almost awe-inspiring, like crazy moment where you're just like overwhelmed by all the Chucky dolls you're seeing. I like how it's so easy for Chucky to climb that incline of those metal rollers. Like, here we have Andy having a hard time with it, and he can, like, grip things really well with much longer fingers, and, you know, his joints move a lot better than Chucky's do, but he's having a problem get up there, but Chucky, no problem. He just moves, like, at a ridiculous rate doing that. Sorry, real quick, gotta... So that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Pretty solid gore when Chucky needs to rip his hand off because it gets stuck in that little cage, like, gate. I thought that was cool. They shot it really well. That's a good moment where it's like, it's really gross and gory, but it's also not a person, so you can kind of get away with a little bit more as far as the MPAA goes for ratings. So that was cool. And a lot of it has to do with Dorff's performance of like yelling and everything, and while he's like pulling his hand off. Sure, the knife hand idea then is interesting, but is it worth the pain? That's what I don't understand. Like, obviously Chucky has this great idea, like, I'm going to stick a knife in this stump. That's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be a good way to kill. But he's gotten relatively human at this point, so that would really, really hurt. And is it really worth it? Just asking a question. I like how the mechanic doesn't know the basic rule that you power down equipment before working on it. I do like the fact that they have like the eyeballs popped into his eye sockets when he's dead. It looks a little goofy. It looks a little funny. It looks a little gross at the same time. But I literally was just like, if this is what this guy does for a living, he would know, power down the equipment before you work on it, because otherwise you can be injured or killed. So he kind of had it coming in a sense. Chucky really feels a lot of pain in this final fight sequence. I already talked about that a little bit earlier, but yeah, it's satisfying for the audience because you're just like, yeah, he's getting his right now. Everything he's done to people, what he's put everyone through, yeah. I really like how he gets inflated to the point of exploding. Love that as kind of the end sequence. Obviously, there are a few moments where you think, oh, he's done for. This is the end for him. Like, he gets put in that kind of like little compartment that like throws a bunch of extra stuff on him, and it sounds like he gets killed. And then he gets, doused in that, molten hot plastic that goes into like making the bodies of the dolls. And then you think, okay, maybe he's done then, which that looked really good. The practical effects on that of like how he's all like pretty melted looked pretty gnarly, pretty gross. And then he's not. And then you're just like, okay, so how are we actually going to end this? So then they put the air pump in him, and then it just like blows up and explodes. Cool ending. Really, really enjoy that. And then in the end, Andy and Kyle really are in a pretty bad situation because they really have no place to go at this point. They had foster parents, and now they don't have anyone. There was a head to that orphanage. I guess they can go back to that orphanage, would be my guess. But I also don't know, like, physically where they are. How are they going to get there? Just like in the first film, you can see why adults don't actually believe Andy and think he has issues. I mean, you can see it. Like, you can understand that from their perspective when you're watching these films. This is an interesting thing I noticed. A bunch of the film is shot at an upward angle, which really does show the perspectives of Andy and Chucky throughout the film. I like that switch. And also notice that when it's kind of like a adult speaking a lot of times, like specifically to Andy, it'll kind of be shot more from like an upward, like a downward angle, or like shooting downward from an upward position. But yeah, a lot of it's shot from like a downward position because you're seeing the perspective of Andy. You're also seeing a bit of the perspective of Chucky. And I think that's kind of a cool directorial idea. It works within the film. Again, just going to reiterate real fast. The first film was about the scariness of the Chucky concept. This film is about the sadistic personality of Chucky and his inability to be killed easily. That's another thing. That's important to set things up to kind of be like, we can have more films in the franchise because it's very hard to kill this guy. Obviously, he's brought back to life in this one, so he can be brought back to life again. So, important for those reasons. Now, out of 5 stars with half stars in play, I'll give this one a 3.5 star rating because I gave the last one a 4. I was between 3 and 3.5, but I think the ending's good enough and the concept's good enough that I'll give it 3.5. But would love to hear your thoughts on this film. Go ahead and put it in the comments. Like it, hate it, in between. Give me like a sentence or two letting me know why. And do me a favor, hit subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I would greatly appreciate that. It is quick, painless, costs you nothing. And it keeps me motivated. Keeps me doing these videos for sure. Other than that, please hit the notification bell button because then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos, which I'm doing at least 4 a week, which is a good amount. But yeah, thank you so much for checking out this particular video. And until next time, keep it brutal.